Are you serious? What about all your lectures to Sean and I about not taking matters into our own hands? Or about how two wrongs don't make one right? I guess I've tried too hard to instill a sense of honor in you boys. Tell me something, Danny. If Zach. My father raised his hand to silence me as I opened my mouth to interrupt him. Let me finish. If Zach had come to your house a month ago and told you to your face that he was going to steal Claire from you, that he was going to take her with him right here and now, would you have defied him? Would you have fought him for her? Of course. My father only raised one eyebrow. That was all it took for me to have an epiphany. Oh, good. I get it. About time, Sean said. The only difference is that the bastard didn't have the guts or decency to tell you to your face. True, but Claire shares the blame. She may even have been the instigator. The letters make it sound like she made up a lot of the shit they did, and I can't go and punch her in the face, right? No, you can't, but we'll deal with her in other ways, my dad agreed. But when it comes to your cousin, I don't care. He should have said no. Not only that, you were his friend. He should have walked away. Maybe take a closer look, but walk away nonetheless. But he didn't. Okay, consider me convinced. Let's think about how I can do this so I don't end up in jail. Next chapter. The weekend flew by faster than I thought it would. My family rarely left me alone. They made me make plans, with Dad and Sean's plans being slightly different from Mom and Mel's. It was the best thing they could do. It helped me focus and keep my pain and grief at bay. And perhaps most importantly, it turned my simmering, about to boil over anger into something cold, implacable, and decisive. Something constructive rather than destructive. Mom and Mel tweaked my ad and made sure it was placed not only in the local paper, but also in a free newspaper and another publication from a nearby town that was popular with the locals for its sports coverage. The ad appeared in all the newspapers the following Monday and ran every day for the entire week. Mom, God bless her abused heart, wanted to make sure the ad was seen by everyone in our town. Claire called several times and wrote me a long letter. I transferred the calls to voicemail where she left me essay-length messages. They all basically boiled down to the same thing. She loves me. Don't throw away our love and the 12 happy years we spent together. I snorted. Hadn't she gone through her things and found her love letters missing? I'd repacked her books, but still. Hadn't she figured it out by now? Is she so presumptuous that she thinks I don't know anything about her affair? Was she really trying to deceive me? To be insolent? Did she really know me so little that she thought my feelings could be turned off like a faucet? Apparently, yes. The only awkward moment was Sunday dinner at Mom and Dad's, and Claire showed up just as we were about to sit down to eat. Mel and Sean immediately took Maddie and Declan into the backyard so they wouldn't hear what happened between my mom and Claire. Thank goodness they did, because Claire put on one hell of a show, crying and wailing. My already high regard for my mom went up another notch. She remained unconcerned with Claire's emotional game. Please, Ellie, you have to stand up for me. I don't know what's gotten into Danny that's made him act so irrational. Maybe he's having some kind of emotional breakdown. Please, I'm begging you. Please convince him to talk to me. He loves me. I know he does. He couldn't stop overnight. As far as I'm concerned, darling, he never loved you. There's nothing you can do about it. If you failed by word and deed to inspire him to love you after 12 years together, I don't see how one more conversation is going to make any difference. Now, if you don't mind, I have guests and dinner. And then she closed the door in the bitch's face. Next chapter. Monday evening, the first shit hit the table. Claire had either read or received the breakup notice, so at 5:30, a hysterical woman showed up on the doorstep, spouting the usual cheating bullshit. Lucky for me, Sean stopped by after work. The realization that he was there for me helped me keep my composure. I've never been more grateful for the family's "don't let Danny spend too much time alone" plan. I knew he would save me if it seemed like I was losing my self-control or deviating from our plan. Danny, you have to believe me. It's not what you think. I can explain. Honestly, did she really think I was that stupid? Maybe she was making excuses. After all, she'd managed to fool me for 12 years, but even so, what other interpretation could there be? Standing next to Danny, watching you walk down the aisle, is the most perverted, most twisted thing I've ever known. Or do you really want to have a baby with me? Did she really think she could convince me that it was innocent? Justified? Acceptable? Reasonable behavior? All of the above? Look, it doesn't matter, Claire. It doesn't really matter. It just shows that it's time to move on. Our marriage is over. No! Claire shouted so loud I was sure our neighbors heard. It looked like my mom was right. For some reason, Claire wanted to save our marriage. No, that can't be it. I love you, Danny. Please give me a chance to explain. You have to give me a chance to explain. I don't owe you anything, Claire, and explaining to you what you're doing with my cousin is a waste of time. I don't care. Please, Danny. Despite what you said, I know I hurt you and I really didn't mean it. Please let me explain. I sighed impatiently. I'd given that bitch a chance to explain herself, not because I wanted to hear her lie. Thanks to my family, I'd finally overcome that painful need. But because my mother had offered to give Claire the opportunity to, figuratively speaking, hang herself with her lies. Nevertheless, she would have to work hard. Gone were the days of looking at me with puppy dog eyes and getting what she wanted. What's the point, Claire? I need you to understand, Danny. If you let me explain, I know I can make you understand. I hummed again, glancing at my watch. Okay, I'll come over tomorrow night at 5:30. You'll have 30 minutes. My tone was harsh, making it clear I didn't want to. Thank you, Danny. You won't regret it, I promise. Where do you want me to meet you? Here. I didn't trust this slut as far as I could kick her with my little finger. I needed more than a recording from my phone. I wanted privacy, but I also needed witnesses in case things turned bad or she tried to lie about what was said or done during the meeting. If the recording was being done at my house, I could have someone from my family within earshot. Thank you, Danny. Thank you so much. Claire stepped forward, shortening the distance between us, and put her hands on my shoulders. She pulled herself up on her toes and leaned in to kiss me. Her intentions were so obvious. Did she really think that if she managed to set me up, I would melt and forgive everything? I couldn't figure out if she was being high-minded or deluded. I grabbed her hands, and at the same time I stepped back and pushed her away, causing her to lose her balance and stumble. I flinched, letting my disgust show on my face. Please don't you dare show me any tenderness. I'm really sorry, it's just that I love you and I miss you, Danny. Whatever you say, Claire. I'll see you tomorrow night. Next chapter. Tuesday dawned bright and clear with no warning of the unexpected turn the day would take. I was finishing work on a beautiful Jarrah wood kitchen countertop when I was contacted by a local radio station. It turned out that Haley, one half of their morning radio show, Oscar and Haley, had read the breakup announcement and recognized my name because she was friends with Dee, another one of my maternal cousins. I guess it's true what they say, small world. Haley contacted Dee, who in turn contacted my mom and Mel. Mom and Mel were happy to share the love letters with my cousin, and she, with their permission, passed them on to Haley. I vacillated between feeling disgusted that my private affairs were being put on public display and elation that perhaps Claire and Rathzak would be publicly humiliated after all. To say that I was embarrassed was an understatement. I felt emasculated, as if I couldn't satisfy my wife and remain faithful to her. But as they say, one digs two graves in seeking revenge, and if my grave is shame, I'll live with it. What did I care what a bunch of strangers thought of me? The people I cared about knew what kind of person I was, and more importantly, deep down I thought so too, despite my moments of doubt. I had a long conversation with Haley. She seemed sympathetic and sweet. Somehow, her invasion of my privacy didn't seem like an invasion at all. Dee had apparently said a lot of unnecessary things to me, which gave me strength. For me, it meant that my extended family rallied to the defense of Danny's corner. At the end of the conversation, I agreed to be interviewed on air Friday morning, and gave them permission to use some of the letters on my website and Facebook page. To keep it PG, some words or phrases will have to be blacked out, but the gist, she assured me, will remain clear. They are going to spend the next few days discussing the topic of infidelity, encouraging listeners to send in their stories. My interview on Friday will be the culmination of their forum. We've agreed to meet the next day so I can sign a letter authorization form. If the show goes as planned and the audience reacts as Haley predicted, Claire and Zach will be judged by a jury of their peers. Perhaps they won't face jail time, as unfortunate as that would be. But then again, not all prisons have bars. Next chapter. I looked around me and cringed. My clothes weren't too suitable for meeting someone at a coffee shop. I climbed out of the truck and ironed my jeans and t-shirt to remove the sawdust. With a rag, I wiped down my work boots. I shrugged it off. The result wasn't perfect, but it had to do. It couldn't be helped. I still had to make a living, and I didn't have time to go inside and change my clothes. Walking into the fancy cafe that Haley had picked out, I stopped and looked around the place. I knew what Haley looked like from the billboards and ads for her Oscar show on the side of the bus. I spotted her bowed blonde head in one of the booths. Good. At least we'd have some privacy. I watched as she glanced at her watch and then looked up. I smiled and raised my hand in acknowledgement. She raised her hand too and smiled. She was average height, but that was the only thing average about her as far as I could tell. She looked much better in person than she did in the promo pictures. Her hair reminded me of Meg Ryan in the Matthew Broderick movie Addicted to Something. Love? I couldn't remember. Her hair was pretty funny. Short, messy, sticking out here and there, with long bangs thrown over her forehead. Daniel? She asked. You could hear a note of huskiness in her voice, like Emma Stone or Demi Moore. Please, call me Danny. Her smile widened and we shook hands. Her grip was pleasantly firm. I think I already know you, she said, sitting down in her seat. Back in high school, Dee used to talk about you and Sean a lot. She'd probably kill me for telling you this, but she often lamented that you and she were cousins. Well, you can tell her from me that Sean has often bemoaned their cousin status as well. Haley laughed, and it was a pleasant sound that enveloped you and made you feel warm. You didn't? No. I chuckled. I was too busy staring at Jilly Clark the whole time. Think back to Dolly Parton and you'll see what this is all about. She was defying the laws of physics. Said, I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of ordering you a cappuccino. I thought it was pretty safe. You're welcome, thank you. We smiled awkwardly at each other, neither of us knowing how to broach the subject of the elephant in the room. It made me feel a little better. The fact that she was uncomfortable asking me about Claire's infidelity showed that there was humanity in her, that my pain and betrayal wasn't a daily occurrence for her. And I looked into her eyes and was surprised to see that they weren't blue or gray as I'd expected. They were green. Very green. In fact, I couldn't recall ever seeing such green eyes before. They didn't sparkle like emeralds, but rather shimmered like the glossy leaves of the peace lily that usually stood in the center of my mother's dining room table. She reached across the table and touched the back of my palm. I've read the letters, Danny. They're so awful. I can't even imagine how you felt when you found them. Can you tell me about it? I studied her, looking for signs of deception or fake sincerity. I didn't find any. Can we decide later what stays behind the scenes? There are details I definitely don't want to share with every Tom, Dick, or Harry. Of course, that goes without saying. I don't want to know about it out of morbid curiosity or for some sick voyeuristic reason. I need to know so I can plan my questions. I must warn you that Oscar is irreverent and may drop a few barbed phrases to make people laugh or raise the temperature. I promise I'll only give him the parts you don't mind sharing with our audience. I nodded. Taking a deep breath, I stared at my hands clasped around my coffee mug. Thank God she'd ordered a large one. I needed every drop. I tried to look at her while I told my story but found I couldn't hold her gaze. But every time I looked at her, she was watching me, her expression serious but kind. I told her everything, not only about how I had found the letters, but also about Claire, who I thought I knew, and about our marriage. There was something about Haley that demanded the truth, but as each word flew off my lips, I wondered how wise it was to be so brutally honest. I could only hope that my faith wasn't in vain. That's it. It's not very pretty, is it? No, it looks like some horribly twisted B movie. That's what Mel said. If I hadn't heard it and seen it for myself, I wouldn't have believed it was possible. It's just too bizarre. It's surreal. It's unfathomable that two normal, everyday people could behave like this. Truth really can be stranger than fiction. Yeah, and I'm just a blind fool who didn't suspect a thing. Don't blame yourself, Danny. You didn't notice the signs because you weren't looking for them. And why should you? You thought you were happily married. When I was a communications major, I took some psychology courses and they had a name for it. God, what was that? Haley closed her eyes and frowned, tapping herself quickly on her forehead. I couldn't help but smile. The gesture looked cute. I got it. She lit up like a Christmas tree. It's called confirmatory bias or something. I raised my eyebrows. Geez, that sounds like an ambiguous expression. What exactly does it mean? Well, when you love someone and believe the love is mutual, it affects how you perceive the words and actions of the one you love. Basically, you believed that Claire loved you, so everything she said or did, you interpreted in a way that confirmed your belief. It would take a lightning strike to make you reconsider. The fact that you found the letters was your lightning bolt. Then I'm not an idiot? Far from it. I smiled. Well, that's gratifying. Did you love her very much? Yes. No. I sighed. I loved the woman I thought she was, but the woman mentioned in those letters wasn't the Claire I knew, so I guess I was in love with a fantasy. That must be hard to come to terms with. Yeah. You seem remarkably in control of yourself. I think I would have cried. It hurts, but I've hidden it away to deal with it later. How do you mean, put it away? I'll give you an analogy. Suppose you hurt your leg so badly that an infection got into it and gangrene formed. Would you cry and moan and wail about how unfair it was, giving the infection time to spread further down your leg? Or would you put the bullet down, amputate your leg, and mourn its loss afterward, knowing that at least you saved the rest of your leg? Oh, I see. Yeah, that makes sense. Like taking one bite at a time instead of trying to eat the whole loaf at once. I nodded, taking a sip of coffee. I held back a grimace of disgust. It was still lukewarm. What are your plans for the future? Do you have any? Have you given it any thought? To be completely honest, I feel a little lost, like a boat without an anchor. Until I found the letter, my whole life revolved around Claire and our marriage. It was all about fixing up the house, starting a family, the last big trip before we become parents. Now it's all in the past. I took another sip of my lukewarm coffee, gathering my thoughts in hopes I could express them in a way Haley would understand. I'm a carpenter. I specialize in interior fit-outs, things like kitchens, wood-paneled playrooms, restaurants, pubs, man caves, and so on. It usually goes like this. The builder or architect gives me some plans, I talk to the owner, and then design and build something to suit the space and their needs. Now it feels like the plan for my life, the plan I've been working from for the last 12 years, has been ripped out of my hands and torn to shreds, and I have to go and design a whole new life. It's frightening. Rationally, I realize that it will get easier from here on out. You just have to live one day at a time, but it's scary nonetheless. I mean, what are the rules now? What are the limitations? I need to rethink what I want my future to be. Haley reached out and placed her hand on mine. That's very profound, poetic even. We should try to incorporate that into your interview. We talked some more, exchanging ideas of questions she could ask me to steer the conversation in the right direction. I told her about my upcoming meeting with Claire, and we agreed to talk on the phone Thursday night in case we needed to change anything as a result of that meeting. I waited for Haley to settle the bill. She declined my offer to pay. I opened the door in front of her and walked her to her car, a small, sporty Renault. It suited her. Let me guess. That's your car across the road. I grinned. What gave me away? The fact that it's a truck? Or all those toolboxes? Haley hummed. Both were big clues, but your license plate Dan007 was the deciding factor. I laughed. Yeah, that's me, McCormack, Dan McCormack. Building license. Oh, and a comedian, too. What a gimmick. We laughed again and said goodbye. As I walked across the street to my truck, it dawned on me that for a few precious moments I was happy, truly happy. Next chapter. I frowned, stopping halfway through. I was going to check the time again. I rested my hand on the back of my chair and frowned even harder as my hands clenched into fists by themselves, my knuckles turning almost white from the strength of my grip. My throat ached, feeling an impossibly tight lump filling it. I tried to swallow it down and frowned at the pain. Gritting my teeth, I loosened my grip and unclenched my fingers, unsurprised by the indentation in the leather of the chair. Slowly, as if it were a huge weight, I lowered my chin to my chest. The action was controlled and deliberate, but that was more from stubbornness than from really owning my emotions. And the only thing I couldn't control was the pounding of my heart. It puzzled me. Why was it rumbling like a freight train? Was it anger? Resentment? Nerves? Or the love I still felt for her? No, it wasn't that. The woman I loved was not the one about to knock on my door. This woman never existed. She was just a figment of my imagination, a mirage. But I mourned her. I missed her. I missed my delusion. Her loss had left a huge hole in my life. Breathe in. Exhale. Repeat. Slowly, deeply, and soothingly. In complete silence that could be called meditation. It worked like a cooling salve on an open wound. Of course, Claire and I no longer had a chance to heal. We'd burned to the ground like coals, and it had been like that from the moment she'd first spread her legs for him. I just didn't know it. As I continued to breathe evenly and wait for my heart to slow, I reminded myself of the plan. As much as I wanted to rip her to shreds with my words, it would have to wait. Claire would do the talking, and I would just take in what she said. I heard rather than saw Sean come up behind me. Taking one last deep breath, I lifted my head and turned to face him. With a reassuring smile on his face, he reached out and took my shoulder. All set. The video camera is pointed at the table and is already on. I charged the battery last night, so you're covered in case of a malfunction. Thanks for everything, Sean. He waved away my thanks. You'd do the same for me. Are you ready for that? More than ever. This better be over with. Sean nodded. So? I laughed. Yeah, I know. Bland, boring, and indifferent. You can do it, Danny. One conversation and the worst will be behind you. I barely had time to nod before there was a terrifying bang in the hallway. Sean and I looked at each other. He smiled and gave me a thumbs up when he saw me keeping a neutral expression on my face. I'll wait in the dining room while you let her in. I craned my neck one last time and stretched my shoulders, trying to release the tension that had built up between them before heading out into the hallway to let my traitorous wife in. One glance at her showed her unease. I got a kick out of that. Damn, it looked like her time at the spa had been wasted. What a shame. Claire, follow me. We'll have this meeting in the dining room. Oh, okay. The click of her heels followed me as I made my way to the back of the house. Sean was standing at the glass sliding doors overlooking the back patio. He turned when he heard us enter the room. I noticed her surprise when she saw Sean next to me. Danny, Hi, Sean. Sean tilted his head in acknowledgement. Claire, I'll wait on the terrace, Danny, while you and Claire talk. Sean pushed the door open and after giving me one last glance, made his way inside. Turning to Claire, I noticed her flushed cheeks and assumed she knew why I had arranged for Sean's presence. With him as a witness, she had no chance of pulling a stunt and accusing me of anything that could go against me in the divorce. Besides, it hid the fact that I was recording our meeting. Why do both? Can I get you something to drink? Water, please. I deliberately placed her glass where guests usually sat before taking my usual seat at the table. Perhaps the message would have been too subtle for her, but I didn't think so as she paused before sitting down in the seat I indicated. Carelessly, as if I had all the time in the world, I leaned back in my chair, taking a sip of water. I didn't speak or encourage her to speak. I just sat there, watching and waiting. Uh, I, uh, Danny, I'm so glad we can finally talk. I've missed you so much. I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I have to say it. I still love. Don't, Claire. I needed to say it. Please believe me. And once I explain and make you understand, maybe we can. I said, stop, Claire. I don't love you, and I don't want to hear your declarations of love. You've wasted your 30 minutes. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, you lying, traitorous bitch. To my surprise, she hesitated for only a moment. The look of shock on her face was only fleeting. It came and went, and was soon replaced by a flash of annoyance, as if I were a naughty puppy who hadn't learned a new trick fast enough. Surely she wasn't so deluded as to think that all she had to do was tell me she loved me, and I would forgive and forget everything. She lowered her gaze to her hands holding the glass of water, as I guessed to hide her emotions. I don't believe you. I can't. You loved me too much to just turn it off like a switch. She risked a glance at me, but didn't find what she was looking for. Her statement genuinely didn't move me. She furrowed her brow and stared at her hands again. I'm sorry I hurt you, Danny. It wasn't part of my plans. I want you to know that it wasn't you. You didn't do anything. It was something separate to us. It had absolutely nothing to do with you. With us. She paused, as if expecting me to say something. I didn't. I wanted to. God, how I wanted to. I wanted to yell at her. Did you? Is that what you're saying? That you bringing a third person into our marriage has nothing to do with me? Next time you'll say it was for my own good. I braced myself harder against the back of the chair to keep from jumping to my feet and yelling at her. I'd really like you to explain to me how you're having fun with my cousin and that it had nothing to do with me. How it was good for me. For us. Explain to me how it wasn't a betrayal of trust. Wasn't a stab in the back. Wasn't mean and selfish. Instead, I took a sip of water. Danny, there's a lot you don't know about me. Things I never wanted you to know. I resisted the urge to raise my eyebrows in sarcastic response, humming to myself, calm, neutral, boring, calm, neutral, boring, calm, neutral, boring, over and over. As you know, I grew up in Broken Hill. It's a small town in many ways. Everyone seems to know everyone. Well, I was known as a bit of a wild child. She sighed and turned her head to the side, showing me the extent of her blush. It ran down her neck to the collar of her blouse. More than a little. I was a whore. I had a reputation. A bad one. When my father was transferred to Kiyama in my last year of high school, I used the move as a chance to reinvent myself. She looked at me, trying to gauge my reaction. Receiving no response, she continued. For the most part, I succeeded, but as I discovered, this whole party lifestyle can be addictive. Sometimes I felt like I was crawling out of my skin from the need to break free. I struggled with how restrictive the lifestyle was compared to my bad girl days. I solved this problem by limiting myself. A couple times a month, I would go to Sydney or Wollongong or down south to Navra, anywhere where I wasn't known, and I'd have a blast, you might say. Having had my fill, so to speak, I could spend the rest of the month being a good girl. She paused again, studying me and waiting for an answer. Again, I gave her nothing but an expressionless look. Then I was offered a promotion if I was willing to move to Newcastle. I met you a month after I moved, and you were so sweet and wonderful, and we had so much fun together. For a while, the urge to be promiscuous died down, but after about 6 months, I got the itch again. Coincidentally, I had to go to Sydney for a week for work, and well, I got hooked. On the last night, I ran into Zach. He saw me doing something I shouldn't be doing with some guy and cornered me. At first, I thought he was going to tell me off, but he didn't. Oh God, this is so hard. Told me he liked a good whore. That's how it all started. Tears rolled down her red cheeks, dripping from her chin onto her blouse. You have to know that it was all just part of the game he and I were playing. I didn't mean it that way. It's hard to explain. She had the decency to look away. It was the fulfillment of that need, Danny. Nothing more. I didn't expect love and care and security from him. I didn't want that from him. I wanted it from you because I love you. I didn't want to live with him. You are the one I want to grow old with. I swear I never loved him. It was never the same with him as it was with you and me. I suppressed the urge to snort in disgust. I couldn't suppress my thoughts, however. They were silently berating her. So now you're schizophrenic. Well, thank you for that insight. Danny, please try to understand. He satisfied a need, nothing more. It wasn't emotional, just physical, not emotional, as if that mattered. It took everything I had to remain silent and calm. My gut clenched with the urge to respond. A bitter taste of bile filled my mouth from the fact that I could only respond mentally. Someday, I consoled myself. Someday I would be able to say them out loud. I didn't mean to hurt you, Danny. I wish I could take it all back. To get a retrie. Was she being truthful? Didn't mean to hurt me? How else could she have envisioned this situation? That she would hurt me was a foregone fact. The only question was when. How could she not realize that? And once she did, there was nothing to be done. The horse left the stable. It galloped away, trampling my heart. Tears came to my eyes and slowly rolled down my cheeks. Were they real? Were they part of her game? Truth be told, it didn't matter if they were real or fake, because nothing depended on them in the outcome of our conversation. Please say something, Danny. Please say you understand. You didn't. I honestly thought that as long as you didn't know, it wouldn't hurt you. I wanted to protect you. Protect us, our love. Our sweet, sweet love. Becoming his whore once or twice a month, I could be a good wife to you the rest of the time. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Please love me enough to forgive me. Her pleading and apology stunned me. It was clear that she didn't see herself as a villain. Perhaps not quite the innocent or hurt party, but definitely not a villain. She saw herself as a victim of her addiction, as she called it. Did she really think I should forgive her and turn a blind eye to the fact that she was promiscuous in order to satisfy her need to act like a slut once or twice a month? How could she not realize what she had admitted with her confession? I had already said that the Claire revealed in the letters was not the Claire I loved and cherished. Now I knew that for sure. Her constipation allowed her to play a role, the role of the sweet wife. It was a role, nothing more than a role. Sweet Claire may have gotten more airtime, but that didn't change the fact that the real Claire was a selfish whore. She fidgeted, my silence clearly making her nervous. Danny, please. Please say something. I need to know what you're thinking. Please give me a second chance. We've been happy. For 12 years you were happy. We can be happy again if you let me make things right. Please let me come home. Make amends? How do you make amends for over a decade of lies and deceit? Disrespect? No. That was all I said to her. One word. Danny, please. I know what I did was terrible. I'll spend the rest of my life being the best wife I can be if you'll just give me another chance. Does our marriage mean nothing to you? Can you really walk away so easily? I picked up my glass and drank the last of the water, trying to douse the fire burning in my gut and drown the rage that longed to spill over my lips. The injustice of her words tested my resolve. Would I give up on our marriage? Would I walk away easily? This was about her. She was the one who'd given up on us before we'd even started living. She was the one who pretended to be something she wasn't and doomed us from the start. I closed my eyes and, taking a drink, I imagined sinking into the cool, calm waters of the meadow pond and began to count. When I reached 10, I regained my composure. Yes, I can walk away and not even look back. I checked my watch. I think your time is up. The trickles of tears turned to outright sobs. Danny, I love you. Only you. I'm yours. I've always been yours. He was just fulfilling his function. Don't give up on us, Danny. Please give me a chance. I can make you trust me again. I can make you love me again. Just give me a chance. I've learned my lesson. I'll never let you down again. That's enough, Claire. Please calm down. The meeting is over. I stood up and, without looking in her direction, headed for the front door, opened it, and waited. I waited for quite a while. She came toward me. Her step was slow, as if she was walking to an execution. She stopped beside me and raised her pleading eyes to me. I love you, Danny. I love you so much. Can't we try to get counseling? Please tell me you'll at least consider it. Counseling is pointless. I don't love you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have plans for tonight. I closed the door quietly, proud of myself for not giving in to the urge to slam it shut. I turned and headed down the hall. The sound of Claire's sobs followed me, but I didn't turn around or hesitate. Next chapter. Sean was in the dining room, leaning on one of the chairs, pulling a camera from the top shelf of the display case. I watched him place it on the dining room table. Are you okay? He asked, grabbing my bicep. I knew he was ready to hug me if he needed to, but I was so full of rage that I needed movement, not comfort. Did you hear anything? A little. Can you believe that? She goddamn spent 12 years lying, cheating, and betraying me. 12 damn years of disrespect, and she thinks that admitting depending on her being a slut is going to somehow make things better? That a simple, I'm sorry, accompanied by a few tears will make it all better? Nothing she can say or do will change the fact that she spent over a decade cheating on me. Those 12 years, I will never get back. No matter what she does to make amends, it will always be a part of our history. She made the unilateral decision to feed her so-called addiction outside of our marriage without discussing a word with me. And now she wants to cry, "Woe is me," because she has to live with the consequences? The only reason she wants me to take her back is so she doesn't have to deal with the consequences. She's just afraid she'll lose her good girl status among her family and friends. I agree, Danny. Whatever planet she lives on, it's not planet Earth. Yeah, I know. I think she thinks her affair should be considered on par with when she borrowed my car and wrecked it, or when she accidentally threw my new cell phone in the washing machine. But Danny, Sean mimicked Claire's voice, I'm addicted to being a slut, so I can't be held accountable for my actions. I snorted, strutting back and forth in front of the glass sliding doors. Did you hear her say that as long as I don't know about the affair, it doesn't hurt me? Jesus, Sean, that's so screwed up. It took everything I had not to jump over the table and strangle the bitch. Doesn't hurt me because I was in the dark? That's like saying cancer doesn't harm you just because for X amount of time you didn't know it was lurking in your body. Try convincing a cancer victim of this logic. Whether you know it or not, it's still eating away at your insides, slowly killing you. Just doing it stealthily until it can't hide its evil face anymore. Sean patted me on the shoulder, heading for the refrigerator. He grabbed a couple bottles of beer and held one out to me. Here, I think you deserve this. Man, I was so proud of you. I'm not sure I could have kept my cool when she was talking some bullshit. You even scared me. You sounded so formal and nonchalant, like a high school principal. Didn't you feel sorry for her? Did you maybe think about sorting things out? No, not once. In fact, when I looked at her, I felt disgusted. All I saw was an actress playing her part. Nothing she could say or do could convince me that our marriage had any meaning to her. Nor could it, or she wouldn't have given in to her impulses and invited him back to her place over and over again. She did things for him that she didn't do for me. With me, she was Little Miss Pretty. And you read the letters. God, she asked him to be the father of our children. You know how long I asked her to start a family, and she was going to deny me even that. That's not love. That's hate. But even without all that, I refuse to live in quiet desperation, wondering and doubting who the real Claire is. I don't want to live with a constant knot in my gut, suspecting every time she's late or out of sorts or, God forbid, in the mood. And I torture myself wondering if she's really with me at that moment, or if she's pasted some other guy's face over mine and imagines it's him she's doing it with. I can't tell you how relieved I was to hear you say that, Danny. Admittedly, I was worried she'd get to you and somehow convince you to forgive her. I mean, I wouldn't blame you. You put a lot of time and emotion into this woman, and I would support you if that's what you really wanted. But I just don't see any happiness for you if you go down that path. I nodded, continuing to pace. I felt like a bull pounding its paws on the ground. What I don't understand is that if Claire wanted to have fun, why marry you? Why marry you at all? Why even date seriously? She could have presented herself as a career woman and acted easy and casual, dated other people, and when either of you got bored or saw someone else you liked, you could have moved on without any hard feelings. I nodded in agreement. Sean was right. Why get married at all if she needed to have fun to be happy? Unless a guy liked that sort of thing, it wasn't going to end well, no matter who she married. Exactly. To me, a huge part of what makes marriage special is that from the day you stand at the altar in front of your family and friends and say your vows, you know that when you say the words, you're promising each other to be faithful forever. You know that you are promising her that she is the only woman you will make love to. And it's the same in reverse. She promises to be yours and yours alone from this day forward. What makes a marriage special without this vow of fidelity? How is it different from casual dating? Why make a commitment? Why make the compromises and sacrifices that all successful marriages require? Without her faithfulness, there was nothing special about her and us. Without that trust and commitment to be faithful to each other, I don't think there is any real intimacy. And without that, she's just another notch on my pole. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but for me it's simple. Black or white, no shades of gray. Either she's mine or she's not. No in-between options. That's just not how I'm wired. And despite her assurances that she was mine, she wasn't. Ever. She was only pretending to be. Wow, I don't think Mom or Mel could have said it any better. You should say some of that shit when they interview you. He winked at me. Since when did you turn into a philosopher, Dr. Dan? Probably because of all the sawdust you've inhaled over the years. I laughed, Sean's teasing smoothing out my rage. Well, at least I didn't get struck by lightning, which is what it takes to penetrate your thick skull. We clinked bottles. Touch C? It's good to have my brother back. Do you think she really believes the nonsense she's talking? I asked. Who knows? Maybe she just can't face the truth. I shrugged. Well, in her case, the truth certainly wasn't pretty. Sean smirked. She disappointed me. I kept expecting her to offer to turn a blind eye to the fact that you were doing it in retaliation. I laughed, and not just any laugh. It was a deep animal laugh, like I'd heard the funniest joke in the world. It would have to be a year-long orgy to even come close to what she and that piece of shit Ratzak indulged in. Next chapter. Thursday night, I sat on the back patio, enjoying the sunset, freshly showered, beer in hand, laptop in my lap, and talked to Haley on the phone. I briefly told her about Claire's visit, not wanting to escalate the situation. While we talked, I opened my email and read Haley's latest questions, discussing my answers with her. Knowing my intention to feign indifference, she had phrased them in such a way that I could speak philosophically rather than reveal the full depth of my hurt and anger. I just hoped I wouldn't lose my cool and give away my strategy when Oscar started asking questions and making impromptu jokes. We couldn't use all the letters. Some of them, if we took all the X out of the text, only a few pronouns and maybe the word they would remain. If you go to Facebook, you can see them. We started uploading them this morning, releasing one an hour. Same thing on our website. There will be a few more coming out in the next couple hours. They're getting a mile of comments. Most people are horrified. There are jerks who think it's normal, and one or two who joke that they'd like to get the number of whoever the bird is. And don't worry, I made sure we blacked out Claire's name and your name on all the pictures we used, so she can't sue you or anything. I'm not on Facebook. Haley chuckled. Why doesn't that surprise me? But you should think about it, if not for your personal profile, then for business. Give me a second and I'll email you the ones we used. Moments later, the email landed in my inbox. I opened the first three, and it turned out that Claire, Ratzak, and I couldn't be identified by the letters. This was a big deal. I wasn't about to shell out big bucks to that lying bitch for blabbing to some fancy lawyer that I had invaded her privacy. In letters and interviews, I'll be a D, Claire will be a S, and Ratzak will be an R. Not using the Z for Ratzak was some insurance, but any family members or friends of ours who asked for a copy of the letters from my mother or Mel, and they assured me that many did, would know who I was referring to. I was sure word would spread from there. With any luck, Claire and Ratzak would be so disgraced they'd leave town. I was comfortable with what I'd done. I wasn't out for revenge. In a way, the means had found me on their own. I simply intended to give people honest and straight answers to questions, not whitewash their actions. In my opinion, if they don't think they did anything wrong, they have nothing to be ashamed of. If they don't want to serve time, they shouldn't commit a crime. I wanted to keep Haley going, but I knew she needed to go to bed early and I needed to work out. I boiled some pasta and checked the remaining love letters the radio station used in case someone mentioned them in an interview. Then I got to work on my answers to Haley's questions, tweaking them as I went along. By the last run-through, my performance was fierce, implacable, monumental. It was a performance in words. Next chapter. Danny, this is Oscar. Oscar, Danny. My greeting was understated. Oscar's not at all. I was convinced the guy had ADHD. Even as he sat there, he seemed to be in constant motion. It was obvious that he and Haley had just as great a rapport in real life as they did on air. They cracked jokes as easily as Sean and I did. I wondered if they were a couple off the air too. Their assistant Zoe bustled around me, placing coffee and apple Danish pie in front of me and briefly explaining how to use the microphone and headset. Her actions were pressing realities. I was about to talk about very personal things to an invisible audience that could number in the hundreds of thousands. A wave of nausea came over me. My stomach muscles tensed, trying to hold back the nest of angry hornets that had suddenly settled in my gut. I couldn't tell if it was through my navel or my throat that these pesky critters were seeking freedom. All I knew was that I wanted them to settle down before I embarrassed myself. A commercial was running. As soon as it ended, I turned on. I looked at Haley in a panic. "It's going to be okay, Danny," she whispered. "Everyone's nervous. Once we ask the first question, the nerves will disappear." I nodded, not believing I wouldn't squeak like a mouse if I tried to speak. Haley took over the introductory and initial part of the interview, and she was right, though by the third question, I forgot that there were thousands of people listening to me. She led me down the path we'd chosen, and I was glad I was able to use the analogies of gangrene and project plans to avoid sounding like a complete idiot. "So, D," Oscar said, "forgiveness was never on the agenda? You don't love S enough to forgive her for her weakness?" Instead of answering that question directly, Oscar, I'd like to turn it around. Why couldn't she love me enough to remain faithful? Or at least, love me enough to be honest? Good point, but man, I have to ask, how did she get away with it for 12 years? Did you walk around with blinkers on? Oscar, I guess in a way, yes. A friend of mine who studied psychology as part of his degree explained it to me. I glanced at Haley, who was glowering. I think it's called confirmation bias, though I shouldn't quote it to you. Jesus, what is that? Oscar laughed. It sounds ominous. It doesn't mean you're a sociopath, does it? Should I call security or use my ninja techniques? Haley snorted. Ninja techniques? Yes, I'm an origami master. I can fold my enemy into a pretzel. I couldn't keep from laughing. Then I'd better behave myself. I don't make good pretzels. In all seriousness, I'm a salesman, and I'm used to reading plans, not personalities. I'm not a psychologist, so cross your fingers for me that I don't get my explanations wrong. Anyway, the bottom line is that when you believe someone loves you, you interpret what they say or do in a way that supports that belief. I looked at Haley for confirmation. She gave me a thumbs up. So you're saying that for 12 years, you believed she loved you and thought only good things about her, and it blindsided you when you noticed signs of her cheating? Yes, that's roughly what happened. I grinned. Now that I've been offered that explanation, I'm sticking to it. That way I feel like less of a gullible fool. Folks, we have a switchboard full of calls wanting to talk to Dee, so please be patient and we'll get back to you. Hello, S. What do you want to ask D? Can't you find it in your heart to forgive R? The woman's voice was squeaky, which could pass for nervousness to those who didn't know her. But I knew her. The caller was my Aunt Sally. He is your cousin, after all. Too bad R couldn't bring that up every time he arranged a meeting with my wife or wrote her a love letter. Too bad he chose to forget our kinship every time he lied to my face and stabbed me in the back. So no, forgiveness is not an option. I'm afraid he's out of my life forever. The woman sobbed, and my heart broke for my aunt, but I couldn't lie to her. I caught a glance from Oscar and Haley, who realized that S must be related. Oscar answered the rest of the call, taking S off the line with practiced ease. Haley murmured to me, "Are you okay?" I nodded, though my heart clenched. I hoped there wouldn't be too many calls like this. The next call made me blush to the tips of my toes. Honey, you have a delightful voice. If you ever get tired of building things, you should consider a career as a radio host. And if you need some comfort, give me a call. Oscar laughed. Well, thank you, B. We'll be sure to get your data for D on the air. I'm sure you'll do the battered ego of D a lot of good. I thought Oscar was joking, but 2 minutes later, Zoe was grinning from ear to ear as she placed the note in front of me. Sure enough, Bev or B had left me her number. The calls kept coming in. Most of them were sympathetic and wished me well. One I suspected was a friend of Claire's, as she asked if there was any way I could forgive the S mistake. A mistake. I'm not sure I can call it a mistake, G. To me, a mistake is coming home with lemon essence when your wife sent you to buy lemon juice, or turning left when you should have turned right. Maybe washing colored with white and dyeing all her delicate things lilac. Can something that happened repeatedly over 12 years and required planning, choices, lies, hiding evidence be considered a mistake? The phone line cut off. I shifted my gaze from Haley to Oscar. Oops, looks like we lost the G. Many of the calls offered advice on how to cope with the loss, from meditation to sand therapy to going into the wilds for a while. One even suggested using puppets representing key players to deal with my irritation. Oscar, of course, couldn't resist a Muppet joke, likening Ratzak to the Cookie Monster. I wanted to protest. I always liked the Cookie Monster as a kid. According to Haley and Oscar, the segment was a success. Zoe laughed, agreeing. Only Justin Bieber and Hugh Jackman got more phone numbers. Dude, sounds like you'll get enough consolation to get by. Next chapter. Unsurprisingly, the interview didn't go off without a hitch. At 5:30, my soon-to-be ex-wife, blazing with anger, pounded on my door. Daniel McCormack, open the door this minute. I looked up to see my father, the designated babysitter for the evening. The show's starting. Just don't give her what she wants, Danny. And she wants a reaction, so don't give it to her. Deny her. Let your words be cool, calm, and collected. I nodded. That's it. I walked down the hallway and opened the door. I even managed a smile. Good evening, Claire. How could you? How could you share my letters on the radio? You're the reason they're all over Facebook. She yelled at me, 2 red blotches staining her cheeks. If looks could kill, I'd be reduced to ash. They were mine. They were private. You had no right to show them to anyone. I smiled. At last we were seeing the real Claire. Private? Really? Whether you're talking about the apartment or this house, the fact is that you kept them in books on the bookcase that I or any guest in our house could take from the shelf and leaf through. This certainly supports my argument that you did not expect them to be confidential. In fact, without making any special effort to conceal them, it could be argued that you wanted them to be found and shared. You shouldn't have shared them anyway, without asking me. I shrugged. I was just following the precedent you set when it came to making decisions regarding our marriage. Besides, I've seen a lot of love letters online. They evoke warmth and emotion in most people. You're obviously not ashamed of yours, after all. You've kept many of them for years. So what's the problem? Don't pick on me, Danny. I I sound like a slut. I shrugged and smiled, raising an eyebrow. What I did may have been wrong, but it wasn't hate. What you did was cruel. Maybe it was wrong? With a question mark? It wasn't hate? Asking another guy to be the father of our child wasn't hate or cruel? What planet does she live on? I almost spat out my thoughts, but as soon as I opened my mouth, my father whispered in my ear, "Stay calm, cool, and collected. Don't give her a chance to react." Whatever you say, Claire. Her lack of emotion clearly infuriated her. Her face flushed even more red than it had when I opened the door. I'm going to make you pay for this, Danny. I'm going to go to a lawyer first thing Monday and take this house away from you. I'm going to throw you out on the street. I'm done pretending. I'm going to make you pay through the nose for humiliating me. How about we save you some time and move out this weekend? You can move out, take over the mortgage payment, and the laborers needed to complete the renovations. The court will make you pay half. You might even have to pay spousal maintenance. Not likely, Claire. You watch too much American television. It's not like that here. You earn a good salary and can support yourself, so you won't be facing spousal support. As for the mortgage, my parents have offered to help me, but it won't be needed if I move in with them or Sean temporarily. Why should they help you? You're able-bodied, you can work, and you make good money. There's nothing wrong with you. Oh, but there is, Claire. I'm afraid the stress and worry of your betrayal has messed up my thinking, and I made a mistake at work today and hurt my back. Not true, but I had an old sports injury that made itself felt from time to time, and I had to wear a belt to support my lower back. That's bullshit, Claire hissed. I shrugged. Whatever you say, Claire. I watched as she tried to think of what to threaten me with next. What method of attack would she resort to get her way? Suddenly, I got tired of her and her games and decided to follow through. Sure, Claire, we could always just jump to the finish line, split the spoils, and sell the house as is. But if we do that, none of us will be left with nothing. I shrugged again. I could see that it annoyed her, so I mentally marked that I would do that as often as possible in all future dealings with her. So what? It's just money. I've worked too hard to let it go to waste, she hissed. I swallowed the contemptuous laugh that built up in my throat. Had she worked too hard? She'd planted a few herbs and rose bushes. What about all my nights and weekends? Then buy me out and you can finish the renovations yourself. Claire narrowed her eyes and looked at me. What did she think I would do? Wither like a flower under the warmth of her gaze. I raised an eyebrow as if to encourage her to answer. Instead, she turned abruptly and stalked down the path, looking over her shoulder. This isn't over, Danny. I'm going to see a lawyer and make you pay. I closed the door and walked back to the patio where I knew I would find my father. Did you hear any of that? I asked, sitting down and taking the soda he offered me. Yeah, most everything. I sighed. I wasn't as cool, calm, and collected as I should have been. I think there was a moment or two where I let her see how angry I was. Nobody's perfect, Danny, and she had her own agenda, and she was pretty testy herself, so most of what you said probably went over her head. I hope so. Do you have a lot of savings? About 60,000. Why? Well, you remember that loan your mom and I gave you when you were 21 to start your business? Yeah. I started to smile, immediately realizing what my father was getting at. So, son, your mom and I are taking out a loan. We're retired and everything, and we need the dollars for the fall years. I grinned from ear to ear. I'll write a bank check in your favor first thing Monday. Thanks, son. The loan was my idea. Mom and Dad always insisted it was a gift and said they wanted to help while they were alive. They did the same for Sean when he became independent. Both Sean and I were proud and stubborn bastards and insisted on doing the loan paperwork, even though we knew Mom and Dad would never accept repayment from us. I've never been more grateful for my stubbornness than I was at that moment, because paying back the loan would have left only 10 grand in my savings account. And it was my savings account. Claire hadn't deposited a dime into it, so no court in the country could say I couldn't pay my debt out of it. Dad sipped his soda, pondering my garden. I guess we'll take Sean's debt too. I nodded. My father was an excellent chess player, and mine and Sean's victories over him were rare. I could see his strategic mind working. After all, if he demanded that Sean's debt be repaid, it couldn't be said that they were only asking me to repay the debt so that Claire wouldn't get to the money. Yeah, Dad pondered. Mom and I have our eye on a few investments. I suppose we'll have the means to invest them now. Next chapter. The next few weeks, predictably, went on a roller coaster of ups and downs. Claire kept her threat and contacted a lawyer, and I received a letter giving me 7 days to declare my assets. After discussing it with my family, I decided not to hire my own shark, at least for the time being. Once Claire sees the state of our assets, chances are she will quietly settle and disappear from my life. I've arranged for 3 different real estate agents to provide an estimate of value in writing. I smiled politely when they all told me that I would have to pay a lot more for this apartment. As I suspected, all of their estimates were slightly higher than the value of the mortgage. After returning the information along with copies of the bank statements to Claire's attorney, I informed them that they had 7 days to provide me with a declaration of Claire's assets. That would piss her off. On the other hand, the love letters have gotten a lot of publicity. Claire and Ratzak got their 15 minutes of fame. The radio station, through Haley, handed me a sack full to the brim with letters they had received and printed out for me, as well as some real letters. Oscar wasn't wrong. Many women offered to comfort me. Haley thought that was great. I didn't think it was great. I liked my anonymity. Mom and Mel were with Haley, though, for a different reason. I think they were already looking for a replacement for Claire. Dad, Sean, and I finally devised a plan for revenge. It wasn't what I wanted. Being old-fashioned, I would have preferred to just face the asshole, challenge him to a duel, and let the strongest man win. Hell, I even fantasized about living a few hundred years earlier and being able to challenge him to a duel. It frustrated me that we live in a time where the laws seem to protect the guilty over the innocent. The way things were going, if I kicked Ratzak's ass, the snot-nosed bastard could charge me with assault and I'd end up doing time. And sitting behind bars defending your own ass, literally, doesn't sound like much of a success. Neither was beating him up anonymously or paying someone else to do it. When I told Dad and Sean about it, they laughed so hard they had to hold their sides, so I guess it was a start. The worst day was definitely when Aunt Sally came to visit, begging us not to turn our backs on Zach. She cried, telling us that he was being shunned by everyone and everything. She blamed Claire, saying she had bewitched him. My mom cried too, but remained adamant. Sally, I understand that you need to support your son, but please don't talk to me like I'm stupid. Bewitched? It wasn't 1 or 2 isolated incidents. It was years and years of lies and deceit. He deserves banishment for the depth of his betrayal towards Danny. Did you read the letters? Did you read how much he enjoyed humiliating Danny? Did you read what he did? He was having fun with her on her wedding day to Danny, for God's sake. How can you ask us to forgive something like that? Please, Ellie, for my sake, please, I can't leave him. He's my son, and he's so sorry for everything. I know what he did was wrong, but he's my son. I know, Sally, but I can't. We can't. Danny is my son. And if you stand by Zach, I'm afraid you won't be welcome in my home anymore. My heart shivered as Aunt Sally reached up and picked up her bag, sliding it over her forearm to rest on her elbow. She reached for my mother and hugged her tightly, the bag swaying and clattering against their thighs. I wished I could video this to send to Claire and Ratzak to show them the cost of their selfishness. Maybe then they would realize that none of us live in isolation. Our actions affect others. Like a pebble thrown into a pond, it ripples. But on the other hand, maybe they won't learn anything, and they'll care even less. My mother burrowed into my father's arms as Mel released Aunt Sally. I stood there feeling helpless, unshed tears stinging my eyes at my mother's pain. I opened my mouth to tell her that she didn't have to say goodbye to my sister on my behalf, but before I could utter a word, my father shook his head and waved me away. Seeing my mother in pain strengthened my resolve. I would never forgive Claire or Ratzak for hurting her. Next chapter. Oh my God, it works. It's really working, I whispered so quietly that the sound of the waves gently crashing against the side of Dad's yacht almost drowned me out. I wasn't addressing anyone in particular, though Dad and Sean could hear me as they huddled against me, listening to the muffled conversation coming over the landline. Did you think it wouldn't? Sean asked quietly. I nodded. Everything is so messed up, so much left to chance. What if he hadn't fallen in love with Crystal? All I can say is, it's a shame she only got him drunk. I would have liked to see her give him a good dose of cotton, my father muttered. After the pain he and Claire caused your mother, I think I want payback as much as you do. The prostitute, or lady of the night as my father called her, didn't look professional. Crystal looked quite classy. We paid her a lot of money, but it turned out she was worth every penny. Apparently, Zach was practically drooling over her. Apparently, Claire was never part of his plans. Daddy being daddy, he took every precaution. He even made Crystal sign a non-disclosure agreement. I bet it was a first for her. I had no idea if it would hold up in court, or even if she'd use her real name, but if it made Daddy feel better, I wasn't going to argue. When she realized who I was, apparently she'd listened to Haley and Oscar. She'd even enlisted one of her friends to act as her wingman and help her settle the score with Zach at no extra cost. Apparently, even prostitutes don't like liars and cheaters. Sean bought 2 cell phones with the money I gave him. One was our night lady's, the other was ours. The only number programmed into her phone was ours. Following our instructions, she called so we could eavesdrop on her night with Ratzak. This was the 3rd such call, and I learned many things I didn't realize about my cousin's true feelings for me. He called me a Boy Scout and a Boy Wonder, and shared quite openly with Crystal and Amber what he had done. He didn't show the slightest bit of remorse. He even bragged about how he was taller than me for a long time. He told his mother so much about how sorry he was. He cursed me for causing his banishment by his family and friends. Said I was a spoiled, pretty boy who always had everything handed to him on a platter. It made me scratch my head. I'm a pretty boy? Sean was a little pissed off, too. Neither of us had suspected that his jealousy and resentment was so deep and rooted in his childhood. I wish I could slip him something to speed things up, Sean moaned. That freak drinks like a fish. At this rate, it'll take Crystal and Amber until midnight to get him drunk. And here I was hoping we'd get to do some fishing tonight. I hummed. You just want to see him shit his pants. Sean hummed in response. Well, yeah, like you don't want to. This was your idea. Remember? Patience, you two. Good things come to the one who waits, though I'm looking forward to shit too. Dad grinned, and in the dim light of the cruiser's wardroom he looked angry. That was one of my criteria. I wanted Ratzak to literally drown in shit. Another criteria was that he had to have both arms broken. It's a great metaphorical message to keep his hands off things and wives that don't belong to him. And that he wouldn't be able to wipe his own ass for a while after breaking his arms and wallowing in shit was just an added bonus to help reinforce an important lesson. But first, Crystal and her friend had to kick ass and talk him into inviting them home. The house turned out to be a small, old townhouse with steep, narrow steps leading up to the bedroom, which he'd joked more than once that he'd been lucky he hadn't broken his neck going down them drunk. But today, he wasn't so lucky. "How about you take Amber and I to your house and have some fun there, sweetie?" I bumped foreheads with Dad and Sean as we all instinctively leaned closer to the phone, silently urging Ratsack to take the bait. "Sure," he whispered. "Let's go have some fun." A soft slurping sound was heard. I looked at Dad and Sean, and we all shrugged. We listened for a few more moments to make sure they were really leaving before getting up. "Let's get this show on the road," Sean called out, grinning from ear to ear. "It'll be just like old times for you two," my dad teased. "Guess the apples don't fall too far from the tree, huh, Dad?" Sean teased, the smirk still spread across his face. Sean was right. Dad's pranks drove Mom crazy. I smiled at them. I couldn't think of two better accomplices to pull this stunt with. One by one, we climbed out of the boat and piled into Dad's black SUV, chosen for this escapade precisely because of its color. It was a clear night, thankfully with a small moon. Perfect for what we had in mind. Luckily for us, Ratsack lived near the harbor, in an old part of town that was experiencing a resurgence in popularity, with many young couples buying and fixing up houses. Rathzack's little terrace was in the far corner of the suburb, beyond which lay the harbor itself. The street had two entrances, and we knew he usually used the one on the city side, so we took advantage of the one on the harbor side, parking in the shadow of the building, away from the streetlights. Despite the lack of lighting, we huddled together, waiting for a signal from Crystal or Amber that we were allowed in. It didn't take long, 15 minutes tops. We all donned the balaclavas, gloves, and dark baseball caps we'd bought to prepare. We looked like a parody of ninjas. One by one, huddling against the walls of buildings to use the shadows they cast as cover, we made our way to the Ratsack Terrace. I felt as if I were part of a covert spy operation. My pulse was racing, but at the same time it was hard not to laugh. I imagined what the three of them would look like if the scene was filmed. I figured it was more Will Ferrell than Matt Damon. Sean pointed two fingers to his eyes and then to the front door of Ratsack's house and a good old-fashioned sign meaning, "Look, see." The girls, as instructed, graciously left his door ajar. We slipped inside and silently made our way to Ratsack's kitchen. We could hear music, mumbling and giggling upstairs where the master bedroom was. He must have thought he was in for one hell of a debaucherous night with two pretty birds, although given the amount of alcohol he had consumed, I wondered how he was going to do it. I pulled the baseball bat out of my pant leg. I leaned it against the wall. Neither of us looked at it. This part of the plan was the hardest part. "I'll go downstairs and get us refills." I couldn't tell if it was Amber or Crystal who spoke, but it was Crystal who appeared at the foot of the stairs. The ever-cautious Dad put his fingers to his lips, signaling her to be quiet. Nodding, she headed to the refrigerator and pulled out 3 slides of dirt. Perfect. The Swedish tang of the laxative would cover the taste of the laxative better than Ratsack's usual poisons of beer or cruiser vodka. The dexterity with which she opened them said she was far from drunk. She let the caps slump across the countertop and brought one bottle to her lips, swallowing a generous gulp. Dad pulled out his contribution to the evening's festivities, a laxative he called industrial strength. It was stronger and faster than anything you could buy without a prescription. He went to the doctor complaining of severe constipation and came out with a prescription. Crystal brought the slide over to her father, and he sprinkled a few crushed pills into it. Winking at her father, Crystal placed her thumb over the opening of the bottle and gently twirled the bottle back and forth to dissolve the powder. Wiping her finger on a tea towel, she gave us another wink and then headed back up the stairs. We listened to the clinking of glasses and merriment, and it wasn't long before Crystal returned for more. She and her father repeated their ritual. It took 6 more rounds to use up all the ground laxative. As Crystal climbed the stairs for the last time, Sean covered his mouth with his hand to suppress a laugh. "He'll shit through the eye of a needle," he sighed. "That's if he doesn't explode first," my father whispered, equally amused. "Come on, sweetie, drink up," we heard Crystal urging. 5 long minutes passed. It was agonizing. Finally, both girls came down the stairs without looking tipsy, much less drunk. If drunkenness were an Olympic sport, this couple would be medalists. "He's out of the game," Amber whispered, though it probably wasn't necessary anymore. "Have fun, boys. It was a pleasure doing business with you." Once they were out the door, we tiptoed up the stairs, with me leading the way. Ratzak was lying face down on the bed, his jeans around his ankles. Perfect. Another excuse as to why he fell. Out of caution, I slapped his cheek and then his ass. No reaction. He was out of it. I flipped him over and turned him so that I was straddling his upper torso. Sean grabbed his legs. It was awkward, and I almost fell myself, but we made it down the stairs without incident. Ratzak didn't make a sound. He really wasn't himself. We laid him down at the bottom of the stairs and I got the bat out. This was the hardest part. I took a few deep breaths, remembering all the things he'd done to Claire, all the things he'd despised me for, all the betrayals, all the times he'd looked me in the eye and lied to me. I imagined my mother crying, saying goodbye to my sister for the last time. I remembered how he made me a party to his lies for his own amusement. I thought about how he had entertained Claire on my wedding day, how he had rejoiced in getting her pregnant, and how I had unknowingly raised his child. And that's when I took a swing. Dad put his hand on my shoulder. "It's good that you don't enjoy doing harsh justice, but I don't want you to ever regret it. The punishment is well deserved." I staggered to my feet and nodded, unable to speak. For a while we all looked at each other, not knowing what to do. Should we walk away? Wait a little while until the fireworks started? "I think we should leave now, guys." We left as quietly as we had come. Not a word was spoken until we got back to the cabin. We all laughed, but it was forced. I hoped even more that my father and brother would never regret helping me get justice. When my father took us out to the open sea, Sean and I cut up our clothes, gloves, balaclavas, and caps and threw them overboard. The bat lived on the boat. Dad used it on those occasions when a shark was hooked, and I simply replaced it in a small utility closet. We anchored, cast the line, drank brandy, and talked about everything in the world except what was occupying all our thoughts. Next chapter. "Oh my God, you guys won't believe what happened at work today," Mel exclaimed as she threw her purse on the kitchen bench and joined us on the patio. As soon as Declan and Maddie heard their mother, they abandoned Sean and me, leaving us lying on our backs on the lawn where we were playing wrestling with them. "Mom," I rolled onto my side. "Well, I guess that shows where we are." Sean chuckled. "Be thankful for small mercies. In an hour, they'll get bored with Mommy and want to tickle Daddy and Uncle Danny some more. Rest and recover while you can." For a moment, my heart clenched. I wondered if I would ever have the opportunity for my own child to be bored with me. I jumped to my feet and held out my hand to Sean. I lifted him into my arms and we shook it off before heading over to Mom and Dad. Mom handed us both a beer each. Moments later, we were joined by Mel, who sat the kids down in front of the TV with a movie on. Nemo should keep them occupied for a while. "So what happened at work?" Mom asked. "You're not going to believe this. The paramedics brought Zach in with broken wrists. Apparently he got drunk and fell down the stairs. But..." Mel burst out laughing. She tried to calm herself down. "But the interesting thing is..." She was at a loss for words again. He... Oh my God." Once again, she couldn't keep laughing. "He crapped his pants!" She howled, covering her mouth with her hand. "He has the worst case of diaper rash." Mel was already crying, so hard she was laughing. We all laughed, and I resisted the urge to look at Sean and Daddy, keeping my eyes on Mel. "Diaper rash?" I asked. Mel wiped her face with her fingertips and nodded. "Yes, he's been lying in his own filth for so long that he's developed the worst case of diaper rash. He became the laughingstock of the whole hospital." "Karma. What goes around, comes around," my mother murmured contentedly. I smiled. The universe had given me a bonus in the form of diaper rash. He always drank too much, my father added, smirking. Next chapter. The months that followed proved to be a long and horrible journey. Claire was true to her word. She took the gloves off and intended to make me pay for making her love letters public. Apparently, it was up to other people to forgive, not her. Of course, her anger was fueled by the fact that the letters refused to die a natural death. Like a bad odor, they kept coming back. It seemed like every other week they appeared on some forum or social media. There was even some joker parodying them on YouTube. As far as I was concerned, it went viral. Their persistence kept Claire on her toes, and she was determined to ruin me. First, she tried to get half of my loan payments to my parents, but the court ruled that the debt had to be paid off before she got her share of the savings. Her next step was to evict me from the cottage, but the judge saw no reason to change the status quo, especially after I offered to go to mediation to settle our financial differences, saving the court time and money. Mediation worked against Claire. The more I withdrew, the more she became enraged. More than once, the mediator had to ask her to calm down. She tried to get a stake in my business but failed because my parents forced me to organize it. Another piece of wise advice for which I will forever be indebted to them. After one particularly scathing text message, sent late at night and prompted, I believe, by a new wave of social media views and comments on many emails, I went to the next mediation session armed with a list designed to embarrass Claire. I scored points for her lack of savings. She, like me, was supposed to be saving 10% of her income, but according to her bank records, she hadn't put aside a dime since we moved into the house, while I was saving far more than we'd agreed. The mediator, who was actually a woman, was shocked when I listed the number of shoes, 57 pairs, that Claire owned. I left that up in the air for a moment, and then added the number of designer handbags she had in her closet at the time of the breakup, 127 pieces, and asked if she wanted to give me access so I could pick out 30 or 40 as part of the division of her estate, since that was all she had to show from her supposed savings. The mediator eventually convinced Claire not to try to get half of my $10,000 in savings, saying that in light of my evidence of how I had paid for virtually everything but groceries throughout our marriage, she would recommend that the court not penalize me for being diligent in saving money, and Claire would not. By the end of the year, however, I had had enough of these games, and I got Claire to agree to sell the house unfurnished. I didn't need it anymore. I wanted to move on with my life, so that nothing around me would remind me of the disguised devil that was my wife. The mediator was supportive of the idea. The condo was sold fairly quickly, and I must confess I took great satisfaction in the fact that I got to hand Claire a check for a little over $1,000 when it was all wrapped up. That equaled about $100 a year for our marriage. I could live with that. With the money side of things sorted out, I filed for divorce. I sent Claire to her job, not so much out of a desire to humiliate her, but because I didn't know where she had spent the last 12 months. It was of my own free will. I needed the distance. The first night, just a few days before I applied, when I realized I had spent the entire day without once thinking of her, the feeling was indescribable. There are no words in any language known to mankind to convey the sense of elation I felt. I felt the way I imagine a dying person should feel when they are told that their disease is in remission. I actually cried. I rested my forehead on the table and sobbed like a child with gratitude. Wave after wave of tears poured out of me, but I didn't fight them. Not this time. I didn't fight them because they weren't tears for Claire. They weren't tears for the loss of my marriage. They weren't tears of resentment and hurt, or even anger and rage. They were relief. Pure, unadulterated relief. It was the knowledge that there would be life after Claire. Maybe even love after Claire. It was the final cleansing of my heart. A final release of negative emotions. They were washing away everything that connected me to Claire. They weren't harmful. They were healing. They were freeing me from my past, and I let them flow. And when they finally subsided, I laughed. I was free. Of course, there were still some details to work out, but emotionally, in every way that mattered, I was free. It was a powerful feeling, a life-changing feeling. That night was a beginning, a real new beginning when I was finally able to sleep through the night. I was finally able to enjoy my food and truly taste the food that was passing through my lips. And best of all, I finally felt peace. It was so healing, so therapeutic, that I did my best to nurture it. I didn't want to go back to obsessing over Claire and our sham marriage. And at some point, I realized I no longer felt compelled to tear Claire to shreds with my words. I got what I wanted: indifference, complete and utter indifference. Through it all, my family had been supportive, putting up with my mood swings, my rants about Claire's latest antics, my bad days when I despaired that this nightmare would never end. I don't know how I would have made it through without their love, patience, and support. Ratty left town without ever suspecting that I was the one who broke his wrists and got his ass burned by shit. It just goes to show you don't drink yourself into oblivion. I heard he moved to Sydney. In a weird way, I felt sorry for him. Our family was large but friendly. There were lots of birthdays, anniversaries, engagements, and weddings, and he was no longer on the guest list at any of them. And he had to bear the guilt that his mother wasn't invited either. I hoped it was weighing on him. One of the bright spots this year was Haley. We'd become friends. One night she asked me why I no longer felt the need to talk to Claire about what she had done. As I put my feelings into words, I realized it would be pointless. Claire wouldn't hear me. She wasn't capable of it. At best, it would have been an accusatory altercation that would have gotten us nowhere. At worst, it would help her justify herself to herself. Even though she no longer had the power to hurt me, I wasn't about to help her ease her conscience at my expense and listen to her try to whitewash her actions with a bunch of lies and self-deception. It was during another evening with Haley that I had an epiphany. While I was a romantic who married for love, Claire was an actress and married to her second star, her leading man who was supposed to showcase her beauty and skill. Our time with Haley was platonic. I liked her madly, and her light touches and warm glances told me she liked me too. But I didn't want to fall into a relationship on the side and hurt her, or myself for that matter. When and if I made my move, I needed to make sure I was acting, not reacting. I wanted the decision to come from the best of intentions, not out of need. I was honest with her. She deserved my honesty. I told her I was in a tunnel, and out of admiration and respect for her, I didn't want to escalate our friendship until I was through the darkness. I will never forget her smile when she asked me, "Are you saying I am your light at the end of the tunnel?" Next chapter. I stood at the mailbox of my new home and looked at the formal envelope in my hand. I knew what it contained without even opening it. It was my decree of the absolute. Without looking back, I walked to my truck and climbed in. At every stoplight, at every stop, I looked at the envelope lying on the passenger seat. It was over. It was finally over. And that's when I stopped looking at it and focused on the road ahead. The road to my future. Who knew how things would work out with Haley? Not me. Not her. But I had a good feeling about it. About her. A feeling I was willing to take a chance on. A feeling I was willing to explore. I sped up, impatient now. I needed light at the end of the tunnel, and I was going to go after it. The end. If you haven't watched the first part of this video, the link will be in the description. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.